about the future. We're going to talk about the future of wallets. We're going to talk about the future of the CISO function. We're going to start talking about the future of the web. And to help us to think about that, I'm delighted to welcome for the first time to this Identiverse main stage a Jedi. No, really, an actual Jedi. The Identity Jedi, to be precise, David Lee.
Wow, that's a pretty good energy for this morning. I honestly expected most of you to be hungover. Who went to the beer crawl? A couple of people. I can't actually see you, but I'm assuming you're raising your hands. I'm kidding, I can see all of you. Thanks to Andy for that great introduction. We are going to talk about some things of the future. Web3, I titled it The Identity Prince That Was Promised. We're going to get to why I called that in a second. In literary works, there's a trope known as the chosen one. And it's actually fairly popular. I'd be willing to bet that if I asked you what some of your favorite stories were, movies, or books, that one of those would contain this trope. And it's usually an individual that has a predestined destiny set aside for them. They're usually prophesized about thousands of generations before. They are going to come and do great things. Change the world, lead a rebellion. But they're not perfect. They're usually flawed. In fact, I would say it's those flaws that we love most about them, because it's the flaws that they have to overcome. And we're ingrained into the story. We get attracted to their flaws because we want to see how this hero not only has to get all these insurmountable odds, be able to change the future, but how do they do it? And the reason why this is so popular is because we love heroes. We love watching that story. We love rooting for the underdog. We love the big battle scenes. We love the dramatic scenes when they're with their crew, when they don't believe they can actually make a difference. They believe that everything in front of them is too big. They'll never overcome their flaws. We love seeing that because in that we see ourselves. And we think, hey, if this character can do it, so can I. It's why we love these stories. And they're told throughout history. Greek mythology, there was Achilles. Known for the Trojan War, he was nearly invulnerable. When he stepped on the battlefield, it was over. Except for one small flaw, hence why we call it the Achilles heel. Stories like Katniss Everdeen, a defiant and reluctant hero. She wasn't predestined, she wasn't invulnerable. She just wanted to protect her family. Specifically, she wanted to protect her sister. And in one moment, one defiant, reluctant moment full of love, she made a simple decision. She volunteered to protect her sister, and in doing that, she lit a spark that would create a fire, that would create a blaze that started a rebellion, one that the people didn't even know that they really needed. She became the hero that they had been looking for, but they couldn't quite put a name on. We love these stories because they inspire. We watch them go through these battles. We love seeing the flaws. They overcome them. How does this flawed person in front of me go through this story? How is Frodo going to figure out how to get to Mount Doom? Yes, I'm a nerd. Thank you. We got another nerd in the house. I would expect it, this conference. But that's what draws us in. It's not about perfection. In fact, if we saw a perfect hero, we would probably reject him. We wouldn't like him. We wouldn't be connected to him. We wouldn't follow the story because there's no fun in that. One of my favorite shows is Game of Thrones. No, I didn't read the books. Sorry. I know. But in the show, there's a prophecy kind of woven throughout the story. It's called a prince that was promised. We later find out, based on the translation of it, it could be prince or princess that was promised. Because sometimes the hero's kind of a mystery. We don't quite know who or what it is. And in this case, throughout the story, it's told generations before that in this world's greatest need, a new villain will arise, one like the world has never seen before. And at that time, this prince or princess will come back, weaving a flaming sword, and lead the world into this new era. It will be there to protect them at the time of their biggest need. As this season ends, we kind of really don't know who that is. We see different characters that get assumed this role. And when I looked at this, I thought, it's really not even about whether or not the prince or princess is named, but it's more about the story. Just the mere mention that a character could be this prince or princess saw hope and following. People fled to them, flocked to them, because they saw that this person could be the one to lead them to their next evolution, this new era, this new world. Identity is kind of at that same inflection point. The internet is changing. In fact, I say it's always been changing and evolving since the day of its inception. What started out as a simple experiment to see if I could send data from one point to another point, because pigeons and ravens are unreliable, so is the Postal Service. We needed a different way. I want to send data anywhere. And so we built the internet. And at the time, that's all we wanted to do. Send data. Cool. Nerd out together. Here's this document. I'm going to send it to you. Have fun. Read it. What we didn't expect was that this would grow beyond even what we possibly dreamed of. Now, we think of the internet, we've got news, applications, financial transactions, media, entertainment. It's everywhere. We carry it with us in our phones, on our watches, in our cars, in our houses. I would dare to say it's one of the backbones of society. If you don't believe me, throw your phone in the toilet and watch the anxiety arise 10 minutes later when you realize you can't do anything without it. The information superhighway became a real thing. We loved it. It gave us all the conveniences we have today. However, some problems. So you say, if it's so great, Dave, why should we change it? Well, unintended consequences are a real thing. In the last decade, we've all become familiar with the words data breach. I would probably be willing to bet, looking at the number of people in this room, all of our information at one point in time has been breached and is somewhere we did not want it to be. Security and privacy wasn't really a thing when we started to internet, and so we tried to bake it in on top of it as we went. Good efforts, but we're getting to the point where maybe it's time to start asking, if I could do this all over again, how would I do it? What would I do differently? So let's rebuild it. Right now, all of us together. You ready? You ready? There we go. That guy's had 3 cups of coffee. So when we look at Web3, the next generation of it, there's 3 basic concepts I want to go over with you guys. And there's a lot more to this, but these 3 concepts kind of really paint the vision for what we look at the future of the internet would be. The first one, user-controlled identity. As we started growing with the internet, we realized that people had to log on. They had to have these transactions. They had to do these applications. And so what did we do? We put up a bunch of forms, collect a whole bunch of information, and kept trucking. But as we've kind of matured with that, we've realized that, hey, maybe we should include the user in this, give them a little control over the information they share, consent to when it should be used. And so going forward, we picture the user not necessarily being the author of all their data, but the curator of the data that is about them. Because it is their data. Just like there's information about you that you have that you decide to share when in any conversation. I'm pretty sure you don't start every conversation with a stranger giving them the complete rundown of every single detail of your life. If you do, I'd love to talk to you one day. The next aspect is decentralized storage. We've created these treasure troves of information, centralized all this information into applications, and made it a honeypot for users to come and get to. This concept of decentralized storage is taking that, encrypting it, and spreading it across many different nodes. Think of this as if I went to a shredder and I wrote a whole bunch of personal information about myself. I put it through the shredder. Then I took those pieces and put it across 1,000 different trash cans across Las Vegas and said, good luck, go find it. Because if you go through a trash can in Las Vegas, you are a braver soul than I am. Finally, that last concept is those pieces of data become trusted, decentralized data. Now that the data has been spread out, we need to make sure that it's data that we actually can trust and that we can verify. Because in this new world, it's less about authentication. Not saying authentication is not important, but it's more about being able to dynamically authorize and verify what this information is. Instead of having it centrally located at one place and being pulled, it's more dynamically registered and verified at the time of transaction in need. When you really think about it, it's what we've been talking about with the things of zero trust for the past 5, 6, 7 years. How do we get the information we need at the time that we need it? This vision, this future is about giving the user more of that control, which means things around it need to change. But let's pop into user-controlled identity. Here's our friend. Her name is Teresa Santos. She's got a digital identity record, some typical information: age, education, some licenses, some skills, her favorite quote, whatever it is. The point is, she's the curator of this information. Some of it she originates herself. Some of it is originated and verified by others. Her education, we will make sure is verified. She says she went to Brown. We want to make sure that Brown could verify that she actually did that, provide that information, give it to Teresa for her to curate. She can decide to share that with whoever she wishes. In the real world, if Teresa was walking on the street and you met her, you'd have a conversation. She wouldn't immediately tell you, maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't, that she went to Brown. It just depends on the conversation. At a certain point, how the conversation was going, depending on what you all were talking about, she would relay that information to you. But it's her choice. She controls it. When we look at the future of the web, it's really about making it a lot more interactive in the way we interact in the day-to-day setting. Most of us are pretty guarded with our information. Based on how the conversation is going or how many drinks we have, leads to how much information we give out. So when we look at how we want to build this with user-controlled identity, we want to create controls and services to allow users to do the same thing they do in the natural world in the digital world. Decentralized storage, back to our example. We're going to shred up the data, we're going to encrypt it and spread it across a different set of nodes, multiple nodes. This architecture is not new. We've known about decentralized architectures for a while. The biggest thing here is that in the more number of nodes that the data is spread out, in theory, the security rises. Because I have to get to every single node to collect every single piece of data and put it together. When I was growing up, my mother loved puzzles. But not like the 500-piece puzzles, like the 2,500-piece puzzles that took like forever to put together. She loved them. I hated them. Kid, impatient. I think it's one of the things that you get older, you like the challenge of putting things together. But the whole purpose here is that we want to make sure that we're not creating honeypots and treasure troves like we have today where users' information can be protected. The likelihood of something getting hacked or broken into in multiple nodes is a lot less than getting into one. In theory. Remember, there's always flaws. It's the flaws that we love. The output of that becomes the trusted, decentralized data. If we're going to break up the data, we have to be able to ensure that we can actually trust that data. We know the source where it's coming from. We can verify that source at the right time. And so that way we don't have misinformation getting put out there. When we look at these concepts and we shape them together, we start to look at a very different way that we interact with the internet. It truly puts identity at the center. Not a marketing term, sorry marketers, but an actual real infrastructure where when we make a transaction, we're considering the identity of the user, we're considering the identity of the application, we're figuring out what data is which, who is the originator, where it's verified from. Identity truly becomes at the center of every single transaction. Let's look at a use case. We're going to get back to our bestie, Teresa. I live in Atlanta, and every weekend, specifically on Sunday, it's Sunday Fun Day. But specifically in Atlanta, it is all about brunch. I have never seen a city more in love with brunch than the city of Atlanta. Like, it is an actual thing. You guys think there's a lot of people here? Come to Atlanta on a Sunday and go to a restaurant for brunch. It's crazy. So Teresa, she's in Atlanta. She's with her friends. She wants to go out for brunch. It's a Sunday morning. She's getting ready. She goes to the location, and of course, they're serving alcohol. So it's kind of like Vegas, except a little bit cleaner, maybe. But she's got her friends, and she's getting ready to go in, and she has to obviously provide her ID because there's going to be alcohol. She needs to prove that she's over 21. So in this use case, usually she has this digital identity or she has her driver's license. Today, she would take out her driver's license, she would show it to the security person, they would check it, make sure she's over 21, let her in. But on this driver's license, there's a ton of information that's actually not needed for this transaction. The security person doesn't care where she went to school. The security person doesn't care what her address is. Doesn't care what her skills are, just needs to know if she's over 21. Right now, the state of Georgia, along with 3 other states, are rolling out mobile driver's license. We can actually have your license on your phone and provide these type of use cases for verification. Right now, they're only rolling it out at TSA, but the point is, when she grabs her phone, she brings up her ID, she knows that she's 26, she just needs to provide that. Transaction happens, bouncer has a device that says, hey, provide it. She double clicks her phone, sends a request to say, hey, is this person over 21? It checks, yes, she's over 21. Sends an actual verified response to the bouncer's device that yes, she's over 21. Bouncer knows that she's verified, she gets to go through. Any information about Teresa that wasn't necessary is not needed. This new internet looks very much like our normal lives. We give the information needed for the request at the time. It's exciting, a little scary. It presents a promise of change, but not a guarantee. Remember, heroes are flawed. But unlike the stories that we know and love, instead of just reading and waiting to see how this character is going to get over the flaws, we actually get a chance to write the story as well. Because all of us in this room are technologists. We're agents of change, whether you know it or not. It's our job as we shepherd this new hero into this new phase to make sure that we're asking the right questions and guiding it in a direction that we want it to be, so we can live up to the promise that we see. As we start to look at the changes that are already happening, we're seeing the waves of change that it can have. You look at finance, hasn't been perfect, but it's shown promise to be able to change the way we look at finance. Traditional finance today, we have a term called unbanked. There's a lot of people who can't get access to the simple banking services that we all know and love in our everyday lives. Looking at Web3 and decentralization and things such as crypto, they get a chance to do that. But again, it's not perfect. It has flaws. We need to fix it. But it causes us to look at things differently. Think about the employee onboarding process. Right now, when you start a new job, there's a ton of information you provide to your employer. That information is needed for specific reasons. But do they actually need to store it? This new world, this new identity, if we can verify at that time what the information is, you as an employee bring the information, the employer verifies it, can trust where the verification comes from, says I have everything I need to. And if I need to request it again, I know a place where I can come and request it. We start to look at data a lot differently in this new world. How much of it do we need to store? What's the actual cost? One of the things about technology that we've seen, I started out as a programmer, and I started with the C language. And for those programmers in the room, when you had C, there was this thing of managing memory because it was expensive. So you were very careful about the data structure you use, the data that you were storing, because you wanted to be as efficient as possible because you didn't have a lot to go with. Over time, we cared less and less about memory. Storage became easier. We just started collecting more and more data. But now's the time to start asking the questions. It's not necessarily about cost per se in the storage aspect of it, but how much data do we actually need to store? What's the actual cost of having that data? If as an organization you were collecting information about a user and we could tag a specific cost, let's say to store social security number, it costs you $25 for every record. Address, that's another $15. First name, last name, $5 a piece. Whatever those values are, if we had actual values tied to this data as we were saving it, we think twice about the information that we save. We'd ask ourselves, do I really need to save this data? What's the purpose of when I need to use this data? These are the questions we have to start asking. Does it mean that employers never save data? Not necessarily, but it's worth the conversation now. Because we can move in a way in which we can verify it. And finally, consumer privacy. Gets a little scary out there. The internet is everywhere. We've got it in everything, in our homes. I can lock my house from wherever I am. I can look at the cameras to see what's going in. Check the mailman, drop something off at the front door. This is the area in which we live in. This is the world in which we live in. But we've done the consumers a disjustice in that we haven't provided them the tools to keep that privacy. So now's the time to ask those questions. As we're going to rebuild this internet, introduce these new technologies, how are we making sure that we're empowering them to be in the conversation to help protect their data? We're not putting the responsibility on them. That's not fair. They're not building the applications. They're not building the protocols. We are. But they do need to have an active voice. We do need to think about them and what tools we can give them in order to do that. We owe them that much. Technology is not just about convenience. It's about protection. But it's got to be accessible for all. $1,000 cell phones can't be the answer. I know a lot of the conversations, a lot of the technologies that we're seeing focuses around Apple's and Samsung's and where these wallets are being stored. We need to make sure that everybody has accessible to this. All of us are pretty privileged in this fact that most of us have iPhones, Samsungs. That's great. These phones are expensive. And not all of us can easily get access to those. So if we're saying that this is now the barrier to play, what we're doing is marginalizing a huge section of our population, even more so than they already are. Because as we roll these things out, like I said, state of Georgia rolling out mobile digital license. Right now, it's only for TSA, but we all know how fast technology moves. 10 years ago, biometrics on a phone, unheard of, not thinkable. Wasn't something any of us were thinking about. Or maybe some of us were thinking about, but it wasn't available. Apple drops Touch ID. 3 years later, they launched Face ID. Now, the thought of biometrics on a phone is an afterthought. Most people use it every day. That's how fast technology moves. As we start to look at this, if we're going to create this new internet, if we're going to provide these ways for users to have access to this, we need to make sure that everybody can get access to it. Because if we start to put this in front of services that the common person needs every day, whether it's to pay your taxes, we saw the fiasco with ID.me, or it's to access certain state services, there cannot be a high bar to get that. Because getting these phones is a privilege. But the internet has become a utility. Whether in use or not, it is. We use it for everything. Quick story about the accessibility of this. So, I got here on Monday. I had a typical Vegas night. Lost my phone. Sucked. If anybody you know Jeremy Roars, he was involved, and that's all I need to say. You know what happened. So, the next morning I wake up and I'm like, I'm going to have to get a new phone. Luckily, as I stated, we're all pretty privileged. Went to T-Mobile, got a new phone, downloaded the iCloud backup, good to go. $1,000+ spent in a second. Listen, if the 18-year-old me could see me now, they would have had a heart attack. I remember when $1,000 would last me for 3 months. Ramen noodles were cheap. Today was an afterthought. But that's not the case for everybody. So how do we make sure that this technology is accessible to everybody that doesn't have a smartphone, doesn't want a smartphone, can't access the same technologies that we can? We have to make sure we're having those conversations. So to do that, we got to make sure that this new internet, this new age of identity is inclusive for everybody. I'm going to tell you something that's probably going to make a lot of you very uncomfortable. Sometimes these rooms, kind of homogeneous. They all look the same. That's a problem. We got to do better. And we do better by making sure that when we're having these conversations, we stop, we look around, and make sure that it's not the same voices. We're not speaking into an echo chamber, that we're inviting more people into the conversation that have different perspectives than we do. Because if we don't, we're going to miss things. Newsflash, we're all smart. We don't know everything. Some of us think they do. We all know the types, but we don't. This isn't something we're building for ourselves. We're building it for everyone. This is digital identity for the people, by the people, so we got to make sure we have all people in the room. So I'm going to leave all of you with a challenge. 2, to be precise. For all the industry veterans in the room, we've seen this industry grow when we used to be screaming at the top of our lungs, identity is important, we need to get a handle on this. Fast forward, we now know it's important. It's at the center of all of our conversations. We call it identity security. So for you industry vets, my challenge to you is make sure that as you're having these conversations, you're welcoming new voices. Seek them out. Make them feel comfortable. Ask them their opinions. Receive them with open arms. Use our wisdom as ways to guide and not ways to intimidate. Be cognizant of that, because it's important. For newcomers in, if you're just now getting into this industry, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Get involved in the conversations. There's a seat at the table for you. We've been waiting for you. It's reserved for you. Your voice is important. As we look at this, let's not get caught up in the technology. Let's get caught up in the uses. Remember, heroes are flawed. It's what we love about them. Fall in love with this flawed hero. Find the ways that we can make it better. Fight the corporate bias. I get it. We work for big corporations. We want those corporations to succeed. We want to be the best that we can be for those corporations. But this isn't something that can be driven by revenue and number sales. It's got to be something that's driven from passion. So I'll leave you with this. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Love each other. For the newbies in the room, these chairs have your name on it. Come take a seat. Let's build a new future together. Have fun.